Hi and welcome to my second video about Timegraphers and how to use them. In the first video I showed you how to set up the machine and how to get a basic reading out of the machine and use it with your specific watch. And in this second video we will go a little bit more into detail, and I mainly will show you different watches with different movements and different problems, and we will see how these problems can be identified on a Timegrapher. If you have not seen the first video, it is linked down in the top line of the description, and it's also linked here in the top right corner of the screen. And I would recommend that if you haven't seen that first video, you should watch it. So let's jump to the first watch. The first watch we have here on the Timegrapher is the watch that you've already seen in the first video. It is a pilot's watch that I built myself, and it's built around a Seiko NH35 movement, which I also regulated by myself. First thing we can see is that the watch is gaining time. It has a relatively healthy amplitude and a beat error of 0.7 milliseconds. And all of this is fine, it's within the specs of the movement. This is basically how a normal picture of a relatively inexpensive watch would look like. The two lines are pretty parallel to each other. There are no big differences between the two lines, and they steadily climb. This is a good picture. It can be better if it's regulated, but this is a healthy picture. This is kind of our reference for everything we see from now on. Let's jump to the next watch. And the next watch I showed you a brief second ago in the first video. And this is, for example, what a very good picture looks like. So we had an average picture before, and this is how a very good picture looks like. The amplitude here is relatively low, but I also talked about it in the previous video. The watch is not fully wound. What we don't have here is two lines next to each other anymore. Here, the beat error is down to 0.0 milliseconds, and we have almost a single line. And if there's a little bit of zigzagging, that's totally fine, but you can see that in correspondence to the -2 seconds, the picture is pretty clear, and the only thing that's not 100% perfect here is the relatively low amplitude. So we've seen a average picture. This is a pretty good picture, and now we jump into the next watch. This is a relatively small movement. This is a Omega DeVille with a hand-wound 625 movement, and the beat error is pretty good. The amplitude is also pretty good at 301 degrees, but what is not working out here is that the watch is losing a lot of time. 17 seconds a day is pretty heavy for a movement like this, and the only thing that you would have to do here is to regulate that a little bit up so that you even out at plus minus a couple of seconds. Here, there's not a problem with the watch. The only thing that has to be done is that it needs regulation. So now it gets interesting. This is a very small watch, and it's also a very old watch. This is a Falca from Switzerland, and the movement is beautiful, but the watch is actually pretty old. I would suspect this watch to be around late 40s, maybe even mid to late 40s. There's rumor that these watches were sold at army stores within World War II camps to army personnel. These watches are not officially military spec watches, and they are also not official equipment, so they don't have military serial numbers or anything like that, but they come from around about the same period, and this is also kind of the style of watches that were worn. This is pretty small but pretty utilitarian because of the red seconds hand and the Minitrack and the finely designed dial that gives you a lot of readability and has a clear emphasis on reading the time precisely. There's also lume on the hour and the minute hand, so this is a pretty interesting watch with a beautiful movement, but what we can see on the Timegrapher is that the watch has its problems. What we can see here is a very high beat error, 4.5, 4.4, around 4 milliseconds. That's actually quite a lot, and that's something that in this watch cannot be easily regulated down, simply because of the fact that the point where the hairspring is fixed to the balance bridge or the balance cock is non-adjustable. So you would have to adjust it by bending the hairspring or by reattaching the hairspring back to its fixing point. What we also can see is that the amplitude is pretty low at 160, and although the watch is fully wound up, this would clearly indicate that this watch is in dire need of a service, simply because there seems to be a lot of friction in the movement eating up the energy and preventing the balance getting the full potential of energy that is stored in the mainspring. What you also can see is that the two lines in the picture are very inconsistent, and there seem to be some trouble in the gear train. If you have a wavy pattern like this, usually indicates that there's some inconsistency in the power flow, which means that there is something in the movement or that there's partial friction generated within the gear train. This is, for example, a picture of a watch that definitely needs work, and at this point I would go into a full service with this watch movement. My expectation would be that if the watch is thoroughly cleaned and serviced, that all of this should pretty much go away. The next watch is a Seiko 5 from the early 1990s, and this watch is powered by a Seiko 7009 movement. And this watch clearly has a problem. The first part of the video here looks relatively okay, and this is because the watch has nearly no power in it. It has a very low amplitude of 173, an acceptable beat error of 0.4 milliseconds. And the rate seems to be pretty good also, but what you can see is that there seems to be some sort of a problem with the entry pallet of the anchor. As you remember from the first video, the upper line, the tick, represents the entry pallet of the lever, and the lower line represents the exit pallet of the lever escapement. So if there are irregularities on one of these lines, you immediately know where a problem is. And in this case, you can suspect that there's some form of problem with the entry pallet. Why I'm showing you this is because look what happens if you put more power into the watch. And this is pretty drastic. Suddenly the beat error increases to 1.7 milliseconds, and the amplitude obviously goes up to 190 and at times over 300. So there is a lot of power in this watch, but the balance cannot manage that. You see that the otherwise good precision that the watch had before suddenly drops to an insane level. And what you saw in the beginning, this small problem with the entry pallet, this could actually be the reason that there's a deeper problem within that only shows if the watch is fully wound. So this watch definitely needs a service. Not only a service, but a thorough look on the balance assembly and escapement assembly, because I suspect that there is some sort of a problem. There is either wear on the pallet, or there's something stuck, or something interferes with the escapement wheel. There is some sort of problem. This is not a thing that you can just regulate away. There's something deeper in this movement, and it definitely deserves a closer look. And the last watch, what I want to show you is how a 50-year-old Rolex looks like. This is my Oyster Perpetual date from 1972, and what a surprise, beat error 0.0 seconds, decent amplitude of 261 degrees, and it's fairly precise with 7 to 8 seconds. But watch what happens if I turn the watch in a different position. This is where a little bit of a trade-off happens. If you change the position of the watch, the beat error can change, which is not that much of a problem. 0.2, 0.3 is still pretty acceptable, and it's very hard to adjust that in this movement. I'm okay with it. That doesn't seem to be a problem. Amplitude is still okay, but suddenly the precision of the watch has become much better at -3, -2, -1, or even 0 seconds. But since the watch is 50 years old, I would consider this a good result. There's nothing that indicates an imminent problem, and so far I'm okay with the precision of the watch. This watch has a hacking second, and I can set it to a corresponding time, and every morning when I look at the watch, it's about 2 or 3 seconds off, and I'm totally fine with it. Thank you for watching this video. I will still gather information on this topic, so maybe in the future there will be a third video on how to use Timegraphers. But so far, I hope these 2 videos give you a basic understanding on how this machine works, how you can use it, and what to read from the picture and the numbers. If you like these 2 videos or like my other videos, subscribe to my channel. If you haven't seen the first part, the video is linked right here, and subscribe for a new video every week, and I hope to see you in the next video.